I'll do a quick introduction. So we have Mr. Stuart Bruce, who is a he's a PR consultant. He also serves on the panel, social media advisory panel for the CIPR. He's an author and lots of other things, but we'll move on. I'm so me.
Google me.
Google him. And he's at Stuart Bruce on Twitter, if you want to quote him about anything. And then we have, it's Nicola, isn't it? Hi, Nicola. Nicola's from Cancer Research, and she is Nicola _Dodd.
Yeah.
And we have Vikki. Oh, I thought I hadn't turned up.
No, I'm here. I'm definitely here.
Vikki M. On Twitter, and she's from TWM. TMW. So I always get it mixed up. Sorry. And the lovely Laura, who is from the Heritage Lottery Fund. So we've got quite a mix here. So before I start, I just want to ask a quick question. How many people here would say they are PR people and purely PR people? Ooh, not very many. And the rest of you are marketing, advertising, social, so advertising.
There are more PR people than that.
Are they lying to me? Do they think I'm going to pick on them? So I'm interested because I think we're at a stage where we're going back to being real PR people and about reputation management. Marketing is marketing, advertising is advertising, and we now have the tools to do that really well. And we're going to talk about future skills and what we need to be doing and adapting. I think it's more about adapting the core skills we already have and using new tools, techniques, and obviously technology. So what I'm going to do is ask everybody to just give you a little insight about what they do and how they're adapting their daily projects, working life to this new world we're living in. So I'll start off. Stuart.
I could just feel that coming then.
Well, he's the only boy on the panel, so you have to let him go first.
Okay, well, I think Gabrielle actually stole a little bit of what I was going to say, which is why I was thinking, I might have some time to think about it now. I think the answer to how I'm adapting what we do, I think that the thing that social media and digital has done for public relations people is it actually enables us to walk the talk. You know, if you've done public relations properly, you've always known that it's meant to be this two-way process, that you're meant to be engaging, you're meant to be conversational. And actually, if you go back to the roots of how PR started, a lot of it was that. And I think what happened in the sort of latter stages of the 20th century is we became confused. Too many of us allowed ourselves to become sidetracked into just doing media relations or to becoming publicists. And that's actually not what public relations is meant to be about. And I think the really exciting thing for me about what social and digital does is it actually enables us to get back to our roots and to start to practice real public relations. And I think one of the kind of other challenges that we have in this space is, and it's happened a little bit today when when people have been talking, is there's a lot of confusion over terminology. And I think a lot of people who are talking about the kind of convergence of public relations and marketing is because they're not actually talking about public relations and marketing. I think that because they are two very different disciplines, the goals that both of them have got are different. Now what they share is a lot of the time we're using exactly the same tools and techniques, but we might be using them for a different purpose. You know, so for example, media relations is something that PR people will use. And just because of social and digital, it hasn't lessened in importance or gone away, we still want to do that. But equally, marketing people can use media relations as a tool or a technique. And I think that's the kind of exciting thing, is that it's much easier for us as public relations people to really understand what our audiences are talking about, to really listen to them, to really engage with them, to actually focus on the words. Public relations, it's about relationships, and that's what we can actually get back to doing. So I think for me, that's what's really exciting about what's changed. I can actually kind of do what I've always wanted to do, whereas before, things like budgets and sheer practicalities frustrated you.
So before we move on to Nicola, shall I just say, let's get this out of the way, a definition of public relations, because I'm sure we all have our own definitions. But public relations, as far as the CIPR are concerned, public relations is about reputation. So maybe it should be public reputation management, not relations, but that's another thing. So public relations is about reputation. It's the result of what you do, what you say, and what others say about you. That's it, pure and simple. So.
And can I just jump in as well? 'Cause I think one of the problems is people often focus on the wrong part of that definition. They focus on the what you say, or even the what others say about you. And actually, the most fundamental part of it is what you do.
I'm trying to think what would be useful to tell you about how we've adapted at Cancer Research UK. In the last couple of years, we've completely changed the way that we do social. So the social management guys came into my team, into the PR team. So we now operate social from a completely editorial perspective. Now that doesn't mean we've lost our ties with digital. It just means that we work really, really closely with the digital team on anything that involves paid for media or has any kind of search implications. Bringing social in has had so many benefits. It means that the PR team are much more socially minded, the social team are much more PR minded. We work really closely together, we produce content together. I'm sure none of this sort of comes as a big surprise, but it has really only been in the last couple of years that this has happened. We've changed things like our working hours, so some of the team operate out of hours on social. We felt that was really, really important. What else has changed? I think we just fundamentally as a team, we have a very different approach to the way that we do things. We really think about content. We really think about things from a completely editorial perspective. We think about how we can use the news agenda. So we're not just putting our own news out, we're looking at how we can use other people's news across social and across PR.
I think that's one of the things that's very important, and it's something that's come up in a lot of discussions I've had about future skills, which is not to be in your bubble, which is either your sector bubble or your client bubble, but be aware, be news savvy and follow the news stream. Because whatever you're talking about, that affects you and your clients and what you're saying and timing. You know, it doesn't matter what the product is, what the service is. If you're not aware of what's going on globally now, as in 24 hours on social, nobody wants an airline who shuts up shop at 5 o'clock because people are still using their service. So it's really interesting, and integrating your teams together, but not in silos. I mean, we all talk about it, but not everybody's doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that sometimes it doesn't always mean having people in the same teams, but it's a mindset, and it's thinking about how you can collaborate with other teams without being stopped by, barriers that can be either reporting lines or budget lines, really.
And knowing enough about platforms and tools that you may not know which one to use, or the one you want to use, you're not the expert in, so pull the right person in.
Yeah, knowing when to ask.
Vikki.
So I guess I'm maybe the odd one out on the panel because I don't work in PR anymore. But really what my experience working in the industry represents is having different hats. And at the moment I have 2 hats. I'm head of social at TMW, which is a digital creative agency, and I'm also head of agency at a company called Things with Wings, which is an agency within the same parent group that represents kind of a blurring of different silos. So our approach is you give us a brief and it's idea first rather than channel. And that's kind of been my experience throughout my career. I started in PR and loved it. Bit of a magpie, so then worked in journalism and edited a publication called Reputation Online, where interestingly, even back then in 2009 and 10, I remember having the same conversation about PR and social representing a true return to actual public relations. So it's interesting to hear that come around. today. And then moving into TMW, where I set up their social department. And that need to be very flexible and agile depending on the opportunities that are presented in front of you, but also what clients are asking for, I think is quite interesting in terms of modern skill sets. And at the time, I remember joining TMW and thinking, you know, really so many businesses are taking community management in-house. What's the future for social from an agency perspective?
Well, it's client education as well.
Yeah, it is, and that's what we've moved into. But being a journalist, you get to see all of the really innovative, future-thinking brands doing those things. Like at the time, Nike had just brought all of its community management in-house, and I remember thinking, God, am I going to have a job in 12 months? Actually, you very quickly understand when you go back to working in an agency that most brands are actually not at the level of awareness, as you say, where they're ready to do things solely in-house. And it's been really interesting to see over the past 2.5 years how that role has developed. And we still, we manage communities for 32 brands now across, 6 different kind of parent groups. But we are moving out of just being moderation and content creation and more into social content producers, and that's in itself quite an interesting kind of switch. I think it makes us more valuable, and also that element of consultancy.
I think the other thing that we forget, and some of you probably forget as well, when you're on a cutting edge, which is blurring with real life, we are ahead of the game. And the things we were talking about 3 years ago, 5 years ago, people are implementing now because they sit back and wait, they have budgets, and they're like, well, is this a flash in the pan? Is it going to go away, or is it the next big thing? And we, as practitioners on a daily basis, tend to forget about that. So.
Well, I think at the Heritage Lottery Fund we've still got quite a long way to go, but where we are at the moment is, in the things that have changed most recently, is probably our core day-to-day activity. We're a funder, we give grants out of lottery money, and that's kind of our bread and butter, is announcing those grants every day and to certain audiences. But actually now it's much more about stories, which was mentioned earlier, and we've got a plethora of stories from our 36,000 grants we've given out, and picking up those and following their journeys. And getting them to speak for us as well. Nobody really wants to hear us speak on the whole, sadly, much to the shame of our directors and things, but actually it's our advocates who've got to the story and who've got the content. And so we're trying really hard to make the most of that. So whether it's their video, things like the Museum of London, the Cheapside Hoard, we did a bit of extra bits around that. So I think that's really the main shift in what we're looking to announce and what we're looking to talk about with key stakeholders and our different target audiences. I say another big change is, like Nicola said, is the integrated approach that we have now to all things comms in our comms team. So digital, social, traditional press office function, public affairs, we're all much more joined up and together now. And social media especially was sort of an afterthought for us for quite a while. And it was an add-on to our big comms plans and our big comms strategy that we kind of thought about as slightly last minute. And actually now it's probably one of the first things that we talk about and the first things that we plan, and then everything else kind of falls in behind. So I think that's a really interesting move for us, especially.
So we've got half an hour left, and I'm very well aware that you've got people here who are doing the job, walking the walk, talking the talk, and I'm wondering, rather than us keep talking, if maybe we could open it up, and if you have our questions or problems, maybe we could address them and then do a roundup at the end, which might be a better use of our time and might give you a little bit of extra help if you need it. Or tell us your success stories, or the opposite, when things have gone wrong, and how you might deal with that now that you've gained the knowledge and experience. So I think we'll get some mics out, give people a bit of warning. Is that okay with everyone?
No, sounds good.
I know you want to talk about measurement as well, don't you?
Can? Do I?
Right, this lady here.
Hi there, Samantha Deeks again. Just a question, have you found any difficulty with kind of having to change skill sets? Have there been any people you've had to drag along with you in this process? Or
Yeah. Yep.
Examples?
So I was quite lucky. I got to kind of recruit a team, but it's quite difficult doing that when you're starting something from scratch and you know the skill set that you need and you know how they need to work. So similarly, my team will work out of hours and they manage that flexibly. But having that within a reasonably large agency that has existed for 25 years and has its own processes is very difficult. And a lot of that is about education, but it's also about getting them to understand that not everything has to be done in the office, not everything needs to be done under the watchful eye of people, and that you have to be flexible in that respect, because otherwise you are expecting a community manager to work from 9 till 6 and then go home and then work on top of that. And so just trying to even start those conversations in the first instance was difficult. It became easier when periods of crisis happened, because that's really when the spotlight is shone on people who work out of office hours and are able to be really quick and responsive. If they were just in the office 9 to 6 and didn't do anything else, we would be in a world of pain. So that helped us along the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a large part of what I do now as a consultant, is working with in-house teams, basically to help them to kind of adapt and to kind of re-equip themselves for how they need to do things now. Because often kind of the approach that organisations think they can take is they kind of look at social and they think, okay, we can get somebody to come in and do our social, when yet they can get somebody to do part of it, but actually what you need is the entire team to start thinking about things in a new way. So for example, if you've got somebody that is doing traditional media relations, they're still going to keep on doing that, but they can add social elements to it. They can begin to understand how the fact that, you know, the online version of the story is probably more important than the printed version, how you can engage with journalists on Twitter. And that, it's a kind of slow process. And I think you used the phrase drag, and I think it's very difficult if you have got to drag people. It's much better when you can actually excite them, persuade them, cajole them, maybe show them examples by sitting alongside them of something that does work, how that actually social isn't about making their life harder and increasing their workload, but actually if used properly can save them time and can decrease their workload. It can mean things they've always done can be done a lot faster and easier than they have done before.
One of the questions I get asked a lot, because I do a lot of training and workshops in-house, agency side as well, is the whole age question. Like, am I or is my team too old? Do I need to get some graduate in to come and start handling this for me? Well, 8 years ago I was an architect and I am that demographic age group, and I'm doing okay. So it's a mindset. It really is a mindset.
I think we, as an organisation, have definitely struggled slightly with bringing other people in, and we had spent a lot of time convincing people that, you know, social media and digital comms and everything was the right way to go, and how we do it, and tone of voice and that kind of thing. And I think the crisis side of it was actually one of the trickiest things for us, because it was so instant. All of a sudden, we were getting suddenly tweets, you know, at midnight and things saying, X, why have you done this? Why didn't you fund this? And I think it set a lot of people into a panic about how do we respond to that. And actually, once they'd sort of figured it out, that you just respond to it how you normally would, you know, in a polite way, and take it offline and blah blah.
And there's a flip side to crisis management, is people don't prepare for success. What if the campaign you're running really takes off and is really positive? That's almost as much a problem if you're not prepared.
Hi, Jonathan from my news desk. I don't really believe in this right brain and left brain thing. I think you have right brain people and left brain people, and I don't believe that you're going to get this wonderful communicator that is brilliant with analytics, is a wonderful creative mind, and can do everything. I'm not sure that Jesus exists. But I've got a concrete question for you. So it's not about anyone that's read Jim Collins' Good to Great, right? It's about who, not what. Doesn't matter what we talk about in terms of strategies or anything like that. If we don't have the people to execute it, then we well and truly are a bit buggered. You, just concrete question, walking away from the consultant's view of things, you're an in-house person that's creating a team. You have 3 resources to hire. Only 3 resources. Who would be those 3 resources and what skills would they have? Question for each one of you.
You've done that, Vikki, so you can go first.
So, what does this team have to do?
Say it's comms and PR.
Comms and PR. Oh, God. So I would say I would need someone creative who can actually create content, whether that's a graphic designer or video producer, someone who can go out and do. I would then look at someone who can outreach, so whether that's bloggers, press, etc., partners as well, I would put under that bracket because that's how I group it within my team. There is a group of people who specifically go out and brand matchmake, and that can cover press, bloggers, or other companies. And then I would look at someone who can do kind of the strategy and planning. Typically, I would like to split that into 2, but as I've only got 3, I'll group that.
So you're going to have a strategy and plan. Even though you're the boss, you're the head of comms, you want someone else.
I didn't say that I was head of comms. If I'm then in the loop, then I would have someone who looks at the data.
Kind of similar, I think. So I would go for definitely someone who was creative, so the person who had the brains behind the big ideas. Then I would get somebody who was, I say kind of next generation, but there are lots of people coming into PR now who are sort of trained as multimedia journalists. So like a multimedia journalist who could go out there, find the stories, do the videography, and possibly also double up as doing some stuff for the creative guy, girl, and then the outreach person. So you're more sort of traditional PR social person who could get the content out and could also manage anything reputational.
I'm going to be really boring and say pretty almost similar, both similar to Nicola.
Stuart?
I'm going to say the same thing, but I'm going to use different words to say it. So a PR person.
And an author.
Yeah. I would have a storyteller. So somebody that can tell good stories like we've been talking about this morning, but using a multitude of different platforms, so they can write, they can use video. I would have a planner, because I'm going to be working with external people as well as internal people. There are going to be other people within inside my organisation who are capable of telling stories and doing things, so I need somebody to coordinate and work with them. I'm going to have a bean counter, because I need somebody to give me some insight and to tell me whether things are working. And you've already kind of identified, I hope I could do the kind of the strategy piece myself. But I'd be interested to know what you think.
I was going to say, have you still got the mic? Because I'm not going to ask you what you think. I'm going to ask you, if you've hired those 3 people, what 3 skills do they all still need to have? Even though they've got their own sectors, what's the overarching 3 things you look for?
I think they've got to have a passion for the business that they're working in and the people that they're working in and the customers that they're serving.
Passion's not a skill.
No, you're right. I think they've got to be able to. You're right. I think being able to spot a good story is still, it doesn't matter whether you're a data person, you can do it through figures, or you're a creative person, you can, being able to, so good writing is still good writing, a good story is still a good story, a headline is what catches attention, and relationships are what, what's going to get you results. The one thing on the outreach thing, I think, which is really interesting that you each brought up, is in terms of outreach, how much does paid promotion come into a PR and communications world today, or in the future?
It's completely intrinsic. The 2 can't exist without the other now, especially from with my social hat on. We are so intertwined with the media agencies, and we, whether it's daily calls, it's hourly calls when there's big campaigns going on, it's this post is performing incredibly well, we're going to push the button to boost it, that kind of thing. It's just it has to happen now.
You can also use paid in quite smart ways. As PR people, you don't need to spend loads of money.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, if you look at things like what the Conservative Party did in the 2010 general election, where they were putting out statements based on the next day's news, and then they were using Google Ads to drive people to do those statements. That didn't have a huge budget, but that's because nobody else was buying those key phrases, so it was dirt cheap. And the other thing you can do is things like, you can target journalists using LinkedIn, using paid for ads. It costs pennies, it really is low cost, but too often PR people kind of put it to one side and think, oh no, that's sordid, that's kind of dirty because you've paid for.
Do you have any other questions?
Hi, thanks. With Shazam, and I had a question. I know most of you are sort of UK based, but this is about global comms. One of the things that you guys had talked about earlier was about issues jumping, or basically sort of integrating your message into a particular issue of that day. How do you address that if you are on one time zone but your spokesperson is on another? How do you hopefully wedge that window open for a bit so that you can get your executive when they're awake?
Does someone want to take this? I mean, I work globally anyway, so I'm the chair. I don't know if I should be answering this, but I adjust my time zones. I'm lousy first thing in the morning, so I have no clients in the Far East. I've worked it that way. All mine are in the States on the West Coast. But the teams I deal with, these days it's not 9 to 5 in your time zone. It may be 9 to 5 Eastern seaboard time. It might, that's how you have to put your team together, I think, and educate people.
I'm not talking about my working their hours. I'm talking about if there's a story here in the UK or in France or in Germany that we can go on to, then how do you wedge that window open? If your executive isn't available to make a comment, but you want them to be part of that story, how do you get that window wedged open so that you can get in when they're online?
Yes.
Okay. There's kind of no one way to do that because it really depends on the organisation, but I was quite interested in the way you were phrasing the question about how you get that executive. Well, to me, in a lot of organisations, the answer is you actually have alternative executives. One of the things that big global companies need to be able to do is to actually start devolving things and putting greater trust on people. So it doesn't necessarily, the best person to give that quote or to jump on that story might not be the chief executive or the director. It might actually be a local country manager. It might be a technical person. It might be, because they're actually the people at the front end. They know the nuts and bolts, so they might make a better spokesperson. But you can't just kind of throw them in at the deep end and hope they can do it, because the chances are they will screw up. So you've got to start you've got to actually put a structure in place where they've been trained, they understand what you're trying to do. So you actually have this much bigger pool of people that you can call upon. That's kind of one way to do it.
And you trust, you've trained them well enough, and you've got them on speaking the right tone, that you trust them. And from that trust, they normally tell the right story, because when you believe in them, they believe in themselves. It's psychology. Psychology comes into this a lot, but it's very important.
Trust is a really important word.
Yeah.
So the only thing I was going to say was that I don't work with executives anymore, but we have a similar issue around stories breaking in one part of the world and needing to get a piece of content or something approved by a specific person. And the way that we have gotten around that through time is to assign point people who have the responsibility of approval in various markets. And we work to specific parameters around guidelines, which is absolutely fundamental to making sure that those specific people can then have the right to approve something within the amount of time for it to still be relevant. I know that's difficult if you want someone to give give a verbal comment or do video or anything, but often in that situation you could still have point people who would write key messages or outline what you wanted someone to say and then do the brief within the same timeline. I don't know if that's helpful.
Anyone else? Oh, have we got very quiet?
We've talked about which 3 people you'd choose if you had just 3 picks. What are the hardest, the rarest skills, but the most, the ones that are really important, but you find really hard to find in a modern communicator?
So I thought it was interesting that we talked about passion earlier, because whenever I talk about recruitment, I always bang on and on about the fact that I would rather hire someone who's passionate about a subject, and I can teach everything else. And so that's the way I've always gone into building my team. I think it becomes really difficult to find people who have very, very deep knowledge about a very niche topic area and can fit a profile. So, it's quite easy to find someone who loves cars, but it's quite difficult to find someone who can talk with any kind of credibility or authenticity about luxury cars or the building of a specific type of engine. And so that then becomes quite difficult. And I think there's a certain element of frustration within the agency context, at least, that you can find people quickly, because there's this perception that there's loads of people who want to work in agencies, and so you should just be able to fill the role. But it takes a lot of time to find those right people, and I think that, for me, is always the most difficult thing.
Is that where new businesses that have come out in the last few years come into their own? For example, Help a Reporter Out. So you ask the question, you want someone who specialises in gold mining in Nigeria, and you find that one key person.
Completely.
No money exchanges hands either. That's a really interesting part. They get their byline, you get good information, and you build up your old-fashioned word Rolodex of contacts from that.
I've only used a recruiter once in the 24 community managers that I've hired in the past 2 years, because, the old adage about a personal recommendation being more valuable is so true, and I never really realised how good Twitter was at helping me find great people until I needed to find really specific types of profile.
It's a great tool, and that's how we met. So. Nicola, have you got anything to add?
Difficult to recruit skills. I don't know. I mean, I have to say we're relatively lucky as a brand, because there are a lot of people, good people, who want to come and work for us. I think it will be interesting as we move forward, so as we get into a space where PR and social are absolutely not indistinguishable, but people are expected to be equally good at both skills, because that, I think then we'll get to a space where we might suddenly feel like we don't have enough specialism in either side. I don't know, it's just a question. Or maybe we won't, maybe we'll just think it's brilliant because everybody can do everything. But we're not quite there yet. I think it'll be an interesting place to go to. And then maybe we'll switch and we'll actually just want people who can create good content.
I remember the days
interesting.
At Reuters when they used to send you on a half-day training course to learn how to use email, because it was all so new and shiny. So maybe we'll just get to the stage where social is as easy as us all writing an email, and it's just part of our everyday toolbox.
Yeah, I'm just kind of following on from what Nicola said. I think there's kind of two comments. Is first of all, when I'm recruiting, I would always look to recruit a PR comms person. I would never look to recruit a social person, because actually that thing about teaching somebody email, it's much easier to teach somebody social than it is to teach them to be a really, really good PR person. It's easy to do that. But to go back to kind of Adam's original question, I think and it's quite depressing, the thing that I find most difficult to find isn't actually a skill. It's what Gabrielle started off by talking about, which is just that general awareness. It's actually knowledge of current affairs, of what's happening in the world, and being an all-rounded person. Because too frequently you speak to somebody that can be really passionate about their thing, and they're really brilliant at it, but they know diddly squat about everything else, and they can't actually function. They might be able to do something spectacularly well for that client, but they're likely to do something spectacularly wrong because they won't be aware something else has happened at the same time. And that is actually a kind of real challenge today.
Like an airline advertising holidays in the Indian Ocean the day after an airline.
But that only happens when you work in a silo. And no business should work in a silo.
Yes, and also I think it's about looking at your team and bringing together people who complement each other. So, for example, in our team we've got ex-BBC journalist, a vlogger, and she still vlogs, but she works for us as well. We've got ex-consumer journalists, we've got agency people, we've got digital people, and they all come together, and they're all officially PR and social, but they come from completely different backgrounds and come together to make what I hope is a really strong team with different skills. I think probably that's...
And it depends on the size of your team as well.
Yeah, it does. We're lucky to have a fairly big team. So yeah.
We've got 9 minutes left. So, somebody up there?
Hi there. David Johnston from CBRE, so we're a rather large real estate firm, so professional services. Professional services don't tend to get all the sexy stuff that we've talked about today, but loosely linked. You've been talking very much about training a central communications team to use these new channels. What I don't think has been touched upon at all as yet is the wider organisation. Everybody has got access to social. For example, our business is part consultancy, part frontline agency, doing deals with buildings, etc., etc. We want, our key, I suppose, challenge as communications teams to get across our thought leadership, our content. We produce a lot of content, but the channels that we use is only, are only some of the channels. We've got thousands of people within our organisation also with channels, and we're really trying very hard this year to train, to educate them to use, especially LinkedIn and, as I said, with professional services, also Twitter, to use these channels. I'd just be very interested if anybody else anybody on the panel or anybody else in the room is also sort of going through this process at the minute, aside from the central comms team, the wider organisation, and getting them to use social media for the benefit of the company.
I think this goes into having a corporate or company strategy, social strategy that goes across the board throughout the company, and you do that a lot, don't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think one actual interesting way of thinking about it is thinking about the donut. So one of the reasons I talked about the comms team is because it's kind of a PR audience, but I think it's quite important that they're skilled up first, so they can then actually act as that central resource. So as you encourage, and I think that's the key word, as you encourage people, kind of the frontline people to start doing things, you're there to hold their hand, to actually guide them, but they're the ones doing it. And I think there's different organisations can make it work in different ways. There's one professional services organisation I know where they had a kind of a limited number of people who were doing things quite actively, and they were finding it very difficult to encourage other people within the organisation to do it. And one of the techniques they used was sort of gamification using their intranet. So they literally had a league table of who was doing how well each week, and it's amazing how the competitive spirit kicked in, and the people towards actually began to do a bit more.
Was that a big agency by any chance?
No, this was a law firm.
Okay, all right. I know a big agency who've done something very similar, and it's made a lot of difference.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I would say is that your employees are going to be your biggest advocates, and so there's social strategy from an external perspective, but from an internal perspective, we're doing a lot of work around that at the moment as well. And it's a really dry thing to come back to, but the idea of having guidelines are really key in that area. And I still always, to this day, refer to IBM as doing this as best in class, even though they did it like 10 years ago now. But they gave the power to their employees to draft them themselves, and also the accountability to then implement it and self-regulate. And that sense of giving them ownership of that means that people are looking at what each other are doing, they're more engaged, they're more open about using social media channels appropriately, and it's not this kind of parental big brother control where a corporate team or an HR team is kind of looking down on them. And so that's still to this day what I think is the most valuable way to
They had 17,000 internal bloggers before they ever did anything publicly on social, which got everybody engaged, and if they weren't writing, they were reading their colleagues' stuff, and it wasn't all about IBM either, it was personal.
And in turn, by using their own products, IBM are lucky they have the ability to do that, but you have this incredible beta group of people using your products and getting to know it inside and out. And there are direct lessons that most businesses can take from that.
Something you need to add to that is when you're thinking of that internal strategy is look at digital law and social media law. It's one of my big bugbears is when people write in their bios, these are my own views, not my employer. Well, if you call yourself Jane BBC, then you're seen as being part of that. So just be careful because legally that doesn't stand up. I won't go on because I haven't got time to do that, but you've got to bring that into your strategies as well.
I think when, for us especially, we rolled out our kind of social media policy. We've got 12 regional and country offices all over the UK, and suddenly the teams who they're not got comms functions in those teams were sort of terrified by this social media policy that landed in their inbox and their Twitter pages that we set up for them, and they were sort of slightly panicked. So we literally went on a tour and sort of sat down with them and said, this is what a tweet is, this is a social media policy, and it's all about reassurance for us that colleagues, we trust our colleagues, we know that they're experts in their field, and that they are, more than capable and really brilliant at spreading our messages.
A half day of hand-holding
is
with
a
a group of
miracle.
10 people
Yeah.
is well worth it.
We're really lucky as well because our CEO is fantastic at all things social and digital, and when they see what she says, and her tone is perfect and her messaging is perfect and everything she does is really on point, and I think when other colleagues, including the comms team, see how she does it, we kind of try and use her as an example.
And those key people may not be the CEO. They may
Well, we're
be
really
your
lucky about that, I
receptionist
think.
or one of your salespeople who's got great character.
Yeah.
And it's a case of, well, if they can do it, I can do it, or I can learn from them. Anyone else? We've got a couple of minutes left.
Hi, Danny Watmay from Ketchum. I just wanted to build on JB's point about if you were to hire 3 people, who would you pick? Obviously, you had a consensus on the panel, and on Twitter as well, there was a very similar consensus about the types of roles. And yet, I think if you look at most agencies and most in-house teams, it's filled with PR managers and account managers. And I'm sure there are lots of those job titles in this room as well. So I'm interested in the business change piece. How, most of us don't start with a blank sheet of paper. We're working in organisations where the structure's already in place. How do we make that change to ensure that we're able to have comms teams that are actually fully functional and able to offer what we need?
Nicola, you've done that, haven't you?
Well, we brought social into PR. I think quite often it's sometimes not about bringing the skills in. The skills already exist. It might just be that you don't have the process to utilise those skills. So you might have a structure that is used to operating a certain way, but if you picked certain people out and asked them to form a little virtual team to do maybe what we were talking about, the skills that those 3 key hires might do, you might find that they produce very different results because they're being given freedom and license and slightly different brief. I don't feel like I've articulated that very well, but just picking those individuals out, giving them a slightly different brief, and just seeing what they can do.
Picking and mixing and using the talents you've got available.
Because quite often they do exist there. It's just that you haven't created a process which allows them to come out.
And don't you think that the core PR skills that we all have, hopefully, are still the same? It's just different technology, and we're working on different timescale. Would you agree with that or not?
I do. However, it's amazing how static so many comms teams, I think, still are. And you have a lot of people that tend to be okay at lots of things, but it's hard finding people that are brilliant at one particular thing. And I think if there's one criticism that I've always sort of seen or kind of put towards the PR industry in general is that we have a lot of people that are very good at lots of different bits. And I think having the confidence to bring in specialists, so people, you look at an ad agency and they have people that understand data, or a media agency, they have people that understand data in a very, very sophisticated way. We don't have that generally in PR, but I think we probably should.
I'm going to have to cut you off because we're out of time, but I think that comes down to what we were saying is knowing what your shortfall is in that team and being able to go out and ask for the help you need. If it's getting a consultant in, getting someone to train someone within your team, but being able to see what you can't do as well as what you can do. I hope we've been of some use and given you some insight, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much to the panel there. That was a great debate, and I'd love to carry on and find out what skills that all you guys are going to bring that will address Danny's point there as well.